Okay, all right. Thank you. First I'm going to ask, does anyone really know what production design is? Oh, great, yeah, yeah.
I'm doing the MA production design with a few of my BAs as well, so production design is really the visual design of the film.
That's right, the kind of three-dimensional designing of it. Everything from the choosing locations or converting locations, building on sets, to props, carriages, cars, to even hand props and the graphics. That all comes under your remit, your control, and it's your sensibilities that will inform the choice right across the whole look of the film. And does anyone know any history about production design? Where it came from, how it came about? Well, the first time it was ever used, production design, was by David O. Selznick. Was in the process of making Gone with the Wind, and he felt that he needed somebody who could harness all these disparate elements, and he called upon the services of William Cameron Menzies, and he was then an art director, and it was the term art director was only used at that point, and Menzies came in and basically took control of a spiraling project that had no kind of helm because they were going through so many directors. It ended up being Victor Fleming who finally got his name on the credit, but they'd gone through a number of directors prior to that. But Menzies storyboarded and basically came up with the whole visual look of the film, and because of that, Selznick decided to use a new term which was called production design, and that was the first time it had ever been used in the history of cinema. So, going on from that, there's been, that influenced then the way in which, sort of the whole, that using that control, bringing that kind of one person's vision with the directors and with the cinematographers to create a whole visual look became this kind of the way forward, with the way in which films were created. And people like Antoine Grott, who then influenced cinematographers like James Wong Ho, and it goes on and on and on. We can go through the kind of history of production design from there, but we won't go there. Anyway, I thought I'd just set that context and then really go into... I'm going to now show a segment, the opening of Birdsong, because it kind of... then I'm going to be talking about the design decisions that were made and how I was influenced with the director Philip Martin about how we went about things. So I don't know whether has anyone seen Birdsong? That's good, just a few. That's good. I should set the scene. This project was 16 years in the making. It originally was going to be directed by everybody: Joe Wright, Michael Mann. Harold Pinter wrote a script of it. Sebastian Faulks wrote a script of it. It'd gone through so many connotations, and finally, about a couple of years ago, it was going to go as about an $80-90 million picture, and it was going to go to Hungary, and it was an Abby Morgan script, and it folded, or it didn't go, and it was then decided to make it as a two-part television drama. So essentially, it was Abby's script cut, expanded into two episodes, running just under 3 hours, and it still wasn't enough because it's such a big novel, and it covers it covers basically the love affair between Stephen Raisford and Isabella Zaire, and against the backdrop of the First World War. It starts before the war in 1910, and then you are jettisoned forward in the novel to 1916, and then finally to 1918. And then in the novel there's also kind of, not bookended, but it goes to 1985, which was completely ignored in the script, which for good reason, really. So anyway, I was given the task of actually designing it, and anyway, I'll let you watch some, and then we'll talk about it in a minute, and then how I came about doing it. So here we go. This is the opening of the first episode. Philip and I went to like a speed dating experience, actually, at the V&A for 1 hour, because I had to get on a plane to go to Budapest the next day to start. And we went to see this. It was about all the aesthetic movement in France and in in England at the end of the 19th century. Influenced by kind of a crossover between the aesthetics of the last of the kind of pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, William Morris, plus with kind of Japanese influences that were coming flooding in. So we were looking at all of this, and we suddenly realised that looking through this huge exhibition, that this was a way in which to actually also use it as a metaphor for the whole of kind of Western culture, which is actually going to just be completely eradicated by the First World War. It's going to be swept away. And this is what a lot of the writers of the period were talking about. A lot of the philosophers were talking about this kind of huge culture that was slightly becoming moribund. And the exhibition was talking about this. And I found that was really, really, and so did Philip, really crucial to weigh into actually defining what the Isère house and the Isère and the French world was going to be. And that was how we decided, right, okay, we'll have to decorate it in such a way that will be there behind the action. So in essential layering it, you're actually using subtext. You're creating the subtext with the visual. So hence you saw all those Chinese screens and plates and stuff in the background. So you're dressing it so you're using it as to help embed the drama in it much more deeply than just, okay, let's go and choose stately home. Yeah, let's go in. Yeah, it's nice wallpaper. It's not about that. It's much more to it. And I think that was the key to going to that exhibition and seeing that, and just pushing that into the kind of the whole of the French look. And that echoes through all of it. There's another section here where he goes into a hallway and it's a colour. There's this kind of green tone. And that was, again, just, we were walking around the exhibition and we really thought, hey, that green colour of the walls that the paintings were on was fantastic, really set them off. And all the paintings that we chose, which we got from Paris, we went to, because this was all shot in Budapest, in Hungary. And the idea was to go there, and because it was meant to look like France, and it doesn't look like France at all, actually. I mean, the boulevards, some of the boulevards look very Parisian, but this is not Paris. This is Amiens, which is outside Paris. It's far away from that metropolis feel. And so we had to create the whole of the French section piecemeal, because it didn't really exist there. Like the opening garden sequence, there was a garden centre. Yeah, I know. There were all statues, and actually behind one of the walls was a building site. And that's my job, to cover that up and make it look like it's something it isn't. So what you're doing is you're creating this other world. And this location you've just seen, which is a location, was a post office that we went in and took everything out. They're very proud of their post offices in Budapest, by the way, in Hungary, full stop. And we brought all the furniture in, and it was decorated in that flavour, in that late flowering kind of symbolist aesthetic. And so it was also to give this kind of golden feel, and it's a very alive look. But actually what you're watching is a memory. So what you're doing is also inverting the idea that the present is dead and the past is alive, which it is to Stephen. So what you're watching is something. That's why I was worried about the colour when I watched this, was that it was much more vibrant, it was much more golden So the past is alive to Stephen, because he feels that's where he was alive, he was in love, and that means more to him than the death that surrounds him in the song. And as you just watched there, the opening of 1960 Amia, and we'll go further forward, is that the Somme is white, because the Somme was white. It was chalk. It was chalk landscape. It wasn't Flanders. The Somme offensive happened in a French sector. Most of the British army was in Flanders, which is further up, much more rain, much more mud, and then you go to the Somme, which is white. And when I was talking with talking to Philip about this, I said, it was on a hot day. It happened it was the 1st of July. It was a baking hot day. Most of the campaign happened throughout that period, that summer. But the first day particularly was really hot. It rained the day before, but they were in these chalk landscape. And we then went to the V&A. So we went over. We were in the V&A. We went over to the Imperial War Museum about an hour after going to the V&A, and had this other really extraordinary speed dating experience round the whole of the Imperial War Museum. And we were standing looking at this huge model, and we started looking at it, and they said, "Oh, crikey, the trenches are white." And you look at it and you think, yeah, they are. They would be white. So hence, you go to a kind of white landscape, and that was totally created. That was a sunflower field. So it was the size of 2.5 football pitches, and we just basically laid waste to it and just bulldozed it and brought everything in and transformed it. So it was to create a completely kind of lunar white landscape that's devoid of colour. So the colour's always in the past. And that genesis of how that approach directly comes from going to two exhibitions and 2 museums, and that's a really great resource. It's a great way of starting to work to solve the creative and inspire the creativity in what I do anyway. I think because you can go to lots of books and you can look through photographs, and that's all very well, but actually the spark can sometimes happen in a different way when you actually see much more tangible, real objects. There's a reality in front of you, and that usually happens for me in exhibitions and museums, because you just go, wow, that image gives you the way into the characters and the way of actually looking at it, rather than end up going, something, I'll just go and get my wallpaper books out, and you bring them out. Because for example, I'm digressing suddenly to Crimson Petal and the White, which is Victorian, and the whole idea was Victorian, that, and I will come back to Birdsong briefly, is that everybody goes to the same sources. They go to the same locations. I mean, I'll show you an example. Jane Eyre. How many people have seen the latest Jane Eyre? Okay, look at it very carefully, and compare it to the BBC version about 3 years ago, and then look at the movie version Franco Zeffirelli directed with Charlotte Gainsbourg and William Hurt, mid-1990s. Okay, then you go further back. They all use the same locations. They're all in the same locations. Watch it. You'll go, oh yeah, absolutely. So to try and bring something new, you have to venture out. You have to slightly be bold, and you have to bring everybody along with that idea, and that means producers and directors, and usually directors along with you anyway by then, but you have to bring everybody along with you. So back to Birdsong. So we've just moved into the First World War section, and this is fundamentally our introduction to the tunnellers, and we didn't really have any it's a bit of an unknown quantity because tunnelling had not really been explored. And Sebastian, when he first wrote the book, was the first person who actually talked about tunnelling in the First World War, funny enough. And and we contacted a guy called Philip Barton, who became the historical consultant on the piece. And there's a really, really good book, and that we did go to a book on this occasion. But it's a complete set, as you probably can gather. But it was actually more inspired by The Great Escape than anything else, because it was all put on rostras, and you could then dolly along the front of it, and you could go underneath it, you could go on top of it. Had dump trucks. Basically, it was sections of it that could then dismantle and then go round and reconnect, so it looked like you got more. We used digital extensions to some of it to make it as if it looked larger and longer. And then we used miniature sections. We built miniatures so that we could use explosions and water and all the rest of it. But then it was all changed and repainted to look like white for when we went into chalk, because at the moment we're meant to be in Flanders, and that opening was the only bit you'll ever see that's really rain in the whole piece. When you come back to it, it was all cut, it was all changed for white, and we brought in tons and tons of chalk, and then filled the trenches with chalk, and then painted this white, because it was actually white. Funny enough, the Joseph, who plays Jack, went down with Eddie into a real tunnel that was all white. He said it was white. It's amazing. It was white, and it was like, yeah, because we have this image that the First World War was always muddy, and that's not entirely true. And that was what we've tried to do here, was show something you'd not seen before in a different way. And I think that's, if you can try and do that, you can. It energizes a piece very, and brings an audience to go, oh well, I didn't know that. That's different. That's rather than the same old. And I think that's kind of quite key. But with the First World War, we were going around the V&A, and we saw things that we thought, well, actually, there was loads of signs, and we were walking around and we were looking at all the signs, and they've got this huge wall of signs. And I thought, well, where did they get the wood? Where did they do this? And you start thinking, well, how did they do this? Well, yeah, they went down to their local village and they ripped signs off, which is what they did do. And I said, well, okay, so you start thinking practically. You start thinking, and you connect those, and you end up with creating a world. Because production design is about also creating is about creating the environments for the dramas to happen in. And there is much about choosing a landscape as it is about designing a set. And you combine that. If you can combine those, then you're creating this three-dimensional world that the action then happens in. Birdsong was shot in 7 weeks, had 10-week prep, and we built the Somme, which was the size of 2.5 football pitches, in 6 weeks. There was 3,000 sandbags used that were made. And actually, what's really fascinating is that they used, when you do your research or you're kind of thinking about it, they used curtains for sandbags. But it'd look too catechism, wouldn't it? So you think, oh, I can't do that. Because you take it too far. Your research sometimes, and where you're looking goes, you think, well, the audience won't go there. So we didn't. We strayed away from that. We built latrines there, sadly, that weren't shot. It was a real to my sadness, really, because nobody had ever seen that before. And I thought that was really interesting. They're quite medieval. And we built all these dugouts, and the idea was that the dugouts would look much more medieval. And there was all water-blasted timbers used, and it was to try and give a feel that's sort of much more organic. And the whole piece had the trenches looked like a shanty town, something more akin to Mumbai than to sort of like the military manual. Because if you go to the military manuals, it's all very straight and boring. And I'm turning into a trench aficionado now. And I'll wave away from that, actually. But it was very important to get that right, because there's so many people out there who do know a lot about it. And part of being production design, you become a magpie. You become really good. Like lately, I've been really good on dinner parties of the 1930s. So I've just done Stephen Pollyak. Anyone know who Stephen Pollyak is? He's the last auteur director in British television, and he really is that. And I think we did, I don't know, dinner party a day, sort of huge dinner, dining rooms. So I think I've become an expert in how the aristocracy fed themselves. So you become an expert. You become an expert on the time you're doing a project. You become this. You research it. You look around. You basically soak all that up. So you might, trains. You might become. You're doing a train piece. You end up becoming trains. You do planes. So it's very much you end up becoming this magpie. The other piece I wanted to talk about was the Crimson Petal and the White. Has anyone seen it? Anyone know anything about it? You should see it. It's really good. It's on your list. I know, it's terrible, isn't it? They thought they wouldn't do it. It's true. Before bigging myself out, I just won the Royal Television Society Award for Best Production Design for this in 2011. And it's based on Michel Faber's novel of the same name, which is like 600 pages, the size of War and Peace. And it's basically, it's going back to the Victorian period, using all the Victorian stock characters, in a sense that were used by Dickens or Brontes, etc., like the Mad Woman in the Attic, all that kind of, all those genres. And basically it turns it on its head and is extremely erotically graphic, the novel, and it follows the rise of this character called Sugar, who's the preeminent prostitute in London, who basically lives and works in Mrs. Castaway's brothel in Silver Street, and she meets with this factory owner. This basically he's a soap manufacturer, and they basically have a relationship. Now the thing about it, Sugar, is while she's getting involved with William Rackham, you believe that it's a conventional love story, and it's nothing of the sort. It turns that on its head. You suddenly realise Sugar's got ulterior motives, has an agenda, and you follow her on this semi-quest for vengeance on men. And it was on BBC Two. It's quite strong stuff. It wasn't period drama as safe Sunday night viewing. And our brief was never to do it like that. It was always to push the envelope. And I came with the idea that sort of like, I'd been to see an exhibition of Otto Dix. And I thought, well, hey, Otto Dix, Weimar Republic, interesting. How do you graft that into the Victorian world? Well, Mark Mundy, who was the director, was really into Max Ernst. And we thought, well, why don't we use those influences into creating this Victorian world? And there was this great exhibition in Montreal of Otto Dix, and it was extraordinary pictures. And there was one in particular, there was a whole series of them, of basically, to find a point on it, on brothels, because that's where he lived, that's where he worked, and this is what he portrayed. And there was one of this incredible brothel keeper that was, he called her Lady in Red, and we thought, that's Mrs. Castaway. And we decided very, very early on that that we'd be influenced by that, coupled with obscure Polish pornography. I know, and which belongs in a very it's extraordinary, and coupled with Gustave Doré, which is the obvious source material for that period, and kind of meld that and mix that to create a new journey into something that you might think you're familiar with, which is the Victorian world, which you've probably seen 10 times over. And it was that kind of brief, it was that kind of visual brief that I got from Mark that we then decided, right, we'll go for it and do it. And we just decided, right, okay, we won't do too much historical accuracy there. We'll just play fast and loose. So what we also then decided that we would colour code it very particularly. You start with, because it's the crimson petal and the white, you start with something that goes from deep reds going to white in the middle because you think she's escaping, and then you end up going to the richest house in the whole piece, which is this huge house, and which we painted a kind of liver red, which had kind of Dario Argento references, really, slightly horror film, and then out into white again as you think she escapes. So what you end up with is that you have the safety sets were white, and everything else that was dangerous was different shades of red or crimson, and were all completely different tones. And but one of the things that I did say was that London was black. It was completely black because of the number of fires. So I said, well, why don't we go and shoot in Manchester in this incredible 360 town hall? And I just made an open sewer out of it, because that's how it worked. That's how they did live. And the whole idea was you created this sewer slurry pit, which looks something like Flanders' First World War battlefield. And it's a metaphor for sugar. It's where she comes from. She wants to escape this dirt, escape this world. Because as well as that, she plies a trade. The poor are beneath the rich. And there's this incredible Gothic architecture that surrounds her. I would have time, we could plug it in and show you it, but I don't know if we've got time to do that. But it'd be boring anyway, wouldn't it? That sort of eject it all. But it is quite a piece. I would, it's quite daring in its direction. Mark's extremely. He's very progressive in that way, and he does bring a lot of influences. So we went to several places together on our initial meetings, and talking about kind of Weimar Republic, Otto Dix, Max Ernst. We went to this incredible house that had a kind of Turkish look to it, because we wanted to kind of influence that drugs were involved. So why not have the aristocracy living in a Turkish kind of like drugged out kind of experience? So there was a lot of bringing unconventional reference points to something that is deemed to be conventional, so that you create a world that feels quite unstable. For example, like the factory, like it's meant to, the factory that William Rackham has, sadly you can't see any of this right now, is actually one of Bazalgette's old pumping stations, sewage works. So wait a minute, we're setting a perfume factory in a sewage works. It's kind of like you're really playing with it. And then there was this, it's like letterheadings, there's an incredible like tavern. So we decided to make it more like a Wild West, and we went to Wilton Music Hall, which is probably, there's only 3 Wilton Music Halls left in the UK, one of which is in Leeds, actually, and then the others in Wilton's, and I think the others in Belfast. And Wilton's is extraordinary. It's beautiful textures, and we wanted to create a kind of much more a place of entertainment, a place that is not a standard like, okay, ye old England tavern. We were trying to just play with the whole genre of what you were expected to see. So we ended up going there. It's an incredible place. If you ever get the opportunity to go, because it is like a stepping into another world. And it was I think primarily though, it was influenced very, very much by going to these exhibitions, going to the Otto Dix, which was an incredible exhibition. And you get, to me, going to exhibitions and using galleries are to me a primary source of a creative kickstart. The first time I got involved with coming here was actually I was approached. I'd read the scripts of Andrew Davies's South Riding. I thought, how do you do 1930s? Yeah. And I came down and I said, look, there's only 30s paintings here. And have a look at that. Because you can often go to 30s paintings, but it may not be, you start thinking, right, there's the obvious people, but why don't you go slightly to the left and see it? And a way of doing that is going to a gallery, because you can see one painting and then see another, and it kind of leads you into another dialogue. And I think that's fantastic. That's why galleries are so important, important to, at least to me. I don't know if they're important to you, but I think they are. I think we can then have, you could end up having a debate about kind of culture, but we shouldn't go there, because culture is many different things. I really thought that was to me a fantastic way of doing it. I did something called Unforgiven. Again, I went straight to a gallery, and I went to see Hammershoy. And I remember, I love Hammershoy. And hilariously, this was an ITV drama about a woman that has been released from prison after murder, And I remember going in for meetings, and I said, look, wouldn't it be great to do a Tarkovsky? Wouldn't it be great to do something like this? And the director just turned to me, are you suggesting we do an art house film for ITV? I said, yeah, that's what I'm suggesting, which is completely against IT. But I said, right, okay. I brought the book in, and I said, look, this is great. There's this Danish painter. I talked about 4 years ago, before the killing, before any of those Danish films came in. And so what we did was we painted all the sets, all the locations in different shades of the Hammershoy colour palette. And what it did was, then when you looked at the paintings, is that it infused a way of shooting it. So, and for David to direct it, it influenced him holding the camera longer, much more stillness, so that it became much more a film or a piece that was slower in its tempo. And that really helped the drama, because you're always questioning whether or not that character has done the crime or hasn't, and have they forgiven themselves, or the world at large has forgiven them. And so that all came about through going to a gallery, seeing and talking to the director and saying that, and we went through that process. So to me, that's how I work. And to me, galleries are really, really important because of that. And they will continue to be so. I think it's tremendous. You never know where you're going to go with a piece. And when you're reading something, you go, well, why don't we? You want to bring something that's going to bring something new to it. And going to galleries, even though these paintings have been there forever, they're there, they're waiting for you like a good book, unopened. You come to them, and your process of looking at a piece can just be an inch in one corner of a painting or a picture or whatever that can inspire you in a way that you didn't think. And I think you should always be, I think to me that's really being open to it, and still using very, very, I was taught that when I was doing at art college, using sketchbooks, going to galleries. That's kind of never left. I mean, we can use a lot of modern technology, and people can Google, and I've got people in my art departments that can research something, but it's only that's fine, but actually the creative element is sometimes missing. And I think if we could go back to actually looking a lot more, and I think the key is always. There was a famous production designer who sadly passed away. He did most of Clint Eastwood's films, and now his name escapes me. That's terrible. But he said you always got to keep looking. I think that's key. Keep looking, and to me that's what it's about. I think I've expanded that. I don't know anything more I can say. Is that all right? Has it been interesting enough?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.